The most powerful weapon in a war is not artillery. It is not a rifle. It is not a tank. The most powerful thing in a war is silence. We are used to the noise of history. We are used to the shouting of dates, the crashing of battles, the roar of machinery. But true history, the history of the human heart, often happens in the quiet moments. It happens when the machinery stops, when the smoke clears, when the ringing in the ears fades away, and the landscape returns to what it was before. Just a field, just the earth, just the cold winter air. Welcome back to the Dozerian. Tonight, we are going to a place that should have been filled with noise, but instead found a miraculous quiet. We are traveling back to the frozen fields of Flanders. The date is December 24th, 1914, the First World War. It is a story you have heard pieces of before, but tonight we are not here for the politics. We are not here for the maps or the strategies. We are here to stand in the snow, to feel the biting cold of the winter air on our faces, to smell the wood smoke and the damp wool, and to witness the moment when thousands of men decided that for one night they would simply stop. Settle in now. Pull the covers up to your chin. Let the warmth of your room protect you. The winter outside is cold, but here, inside this story, you are safe. Let the tension of the week dissolve. Let the snow fall in your mind. Let the world turn white. Let the silence begin. The frozen earth. To understand the miracle, you must first understand the misery. By December of 1914, the war was supposed to be over. Home by Christmas, the newspapers had promised. But the soldiers were not home. They were in the ground. The trenches of the Western Front were open wounds in the earth, stretching like scars across the face of Europe. For weeks it had rained, a cold, relentless gray rain that turned the soil of Belgium into a thick, clinging mud. It was a mud that swallowed everything. It soaked through boots. It soaked through thick wool coats. It froze the spirit. It seemed as if the land itself was weeping. But on Christmas Eve, the weather shifted. The heavy gray clouds that had blanketed the sky for weeks finally broke apart. The rain stopped, and then the temperature dropped. Sharp, fast. A hard frost settled over the land. The mud, which had been a swamp for so long, froze solid. The ground became hard as iron. The puddles turned into mirrors of ice, and then a light began to rise from the fields. Imagine standing there. You are a British soldier. You are shivering in a dugout carved from wet clay. The air smells of damp earth, tobacco smoke, and the sharp, clean scent of frost. You look up, and the sky is clear. For the first time in weeks, the moon is visible. A pale silver eye looking down on the scarred earth. It illuminates the frost on the barbed wire, turning the twisted metal into something that looks almost like tinsel. The world is blue and silver and cold, and for the first time in months, it is quiet. The lights in the dark. It began with the Germans. Across the area known as the No Man's Land, that deadly strip of empty ground only 60 yards wide in some places, the British sentries saw something impossible. Lights. Tiny flickering lights appearing on the rim of the German trenches. At first, the British tightened their grip on their rifles. They thought it was a trick. Were they muzzle flashes, signals for an attack? But the lights did not move. They remained steady. They were warm. They were golden. Through the binoculars, the truth revealed itself. They were candles. The German soldiers were placing small Christmas trees, Tannenbaum, along the edges of their earthworks. Dozens of them, hundreds of them. lining the edge of the trench like a string of pearls in the dark. And then the sound carried across the frozen air. It wasn't a shout, it wasn't a command, it was a melody. Low at first, then growing stronger. Stille Nacht, heilig Wacht, silent night, holy night. The British listened in disbelief, the most famous carol in the world drifting across the killing fields. The sound traveled perfectly in the crisp, cold air. Slowly, hesitantly, the British soldiers began to sing back. They did not shoot, they sang. They sang the English words, "All is calm, all is bright." Two armies, two languages, singing the same melody into the same cold sky. The voices blended together in the mist. For a moment, the war didn't exist. There were no uniforms in the dark, just the voices of men who were cold and far from home and missing the people they loved. Meeting in the mist. Then came the moment of truth, the moment that history still struggles to believe. The signing faded. A silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence. It was an expectant silence. A voice called out from the German lines, broken English drifting through the fog. "You no shoot, we no shoot." And then a figure stood up. In a war where lifting your head meant certain death, a German soldier climbed out of his trench. He stood tall in the moonlight. His hands were raised above his head. He was unarmed. He was walking slowly into the middle of no man's land. The British officers shouted orders to hold fire, but they didn't need to. No one pulled the trigger. Then a British soldier climbed out to meet him, then another, then another. It was a slow, tentative migration, like a dream. Hundreds of men, dressed in field gray and khaki, climbing out of the earth like ghosts. They walked crunching over the frozen mud. They walked past the shell holes. They walked until they met in the middle. There was no hatred here. The propaganda had said these men were monsters, but up close, beneath the heavy coats and the dirt, they saw faces just like their own. Tired faces, young faces, red cheeks from the cold. They shook hands. The gloves were rough and wool, but the grip was human. They exchanged what little they had: a button cut from a tunic coat, a tin of plum jam, a cigar, a photograph of a family pulled from a pocket and shown by the light of a match. "This is my wife," one would say. "This is my son," the other would reply. And in that exchange, they realized they were not enemies. They were just sufferers of the same storm. But amidst the joy, there was a heavy, solemn duty. The truce allowed for something else, something deeply important. It allowed them to bury their dead. For weeks, the bodies of fallen soldiers from both sides had lain out in no man's land, unreachable because of the fighting. Now, in the quiet of Christmas morning, the living worked together to care for the fallen. Imagine the scene. British and German soldiers side by side, digging into the frozen earth with spades. There was no animosity, just a quiet respect. They helped each other carry the bodies. They stood together as chaplains read the service. The 23rd Psalm was read. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The words were spoken in English, then in German. "Der Herr ist mein Hirte, mir wird nichts mangeln." It was a profound, shared grief. They were burying their friends, but they were doing it with the help of the men who had killed them. In that strange, frozen silence, the absurdity of the war became clear to everyone. They stood with heads bowed, their breath pluming in the cold air like incense, united by the one thing they all shared: mortality. And then, as the mood lifted, the legend says, they played. It wasn't a stadium match, there were no referees. In some places, it was a real football, kicked high into the gray sky. In others, it was just a tin can or a bundle of rags tied together with string. But imagine the sound. Hundreds of men running on the frozen ground, their heavy boots slipping on the ice. Laughter, genuine human laughter, ringing out in a place designed for death. They chased the ball through the frost. They cheered when someone fell over. They clapped each other on the back. One British soldier wrote home in a letter, "It was a distinct freeze-up. We had a rare old jollification." A German soldier who had been a barber in London before the war even set up a chair in the middle of a shell crater and gave haircuts to the British soldiers. For an hour, or maybe two, they were not soldiers. They were boys again, playing in a winter park. The officers watched, unsure what to do, eventually turning a blind eye. The humanity was too strong to stop. The war was waiting. The artillery was waiting. But for this brief, suspended moment in time, there was only the game and the peace. The return of the silence. But a truce is a fragile thing. As the sun began to set on Christmas Day, casting long purple shadows across the snow, the officers knew it had to end. The generals far behind the lines were furious when they heard the news. Orders were shouted down the telephone lines. The magic began to fade. One by one, the men shook hands for the last time. They looked each other in the eye. They said, "Good luck." They said, "Stay safe." A strange thing to say to a man you were supposed to kill tomorrow. They turned their backs and walked slowly toward their own lines, the gray coats to the east, the khaki coats to the west. They climbed back down into the earth, back into the mud. The candles on the parapets had burned out. The trees were taken down. A flare went up into the sky, a signal that the war was back. A single rifle shot cracked in the distance, then another, and then the heavy, grinding machinery of the war started up again. But the men who sat in the dugouts that night were different. They sat in the dark, smoking the tobacco they had been given by the enemy, staring at the dirt walls. They knew a secret now. They knew that the enemy was not a monster. They knew that the silence was better than the noise. And now, let us return to that field. Imagine it empty. The soldiers are gone now. History has moved on. The war ended long ago. The trenches have been filled in by time. The grass has grown over the scars. It is winter again in Flanders. The snow begins to fall. Large, soft flakes drifting down from the dark sky. Watch them fall in your mind. One flake, then another, then another. It covers the ground. It covers the wire. It covers the footprints where they played. It turns the world into a clean white sheet. The air is cold, but you are warm. You are watching the snow fall. Silence. White. Peaceful. There is no war here anymore. Only the wind. Only the memory of a song drifting on the breeze. Sleep in heavenly peace. Sleep in heavenly peace. The world is quiet. The past is resting. And so are you. The snow is falling deeper now. Everything is soft. Everything is still. Drift into the white. Drift into the quiet. Good night.